What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over equipping weapons and equipment or items to weapon and equipment slots. So in the first episode of this, and this is all branching off the inventory mini-series within the Action RPG tutorial series, but in the first episode of the weapon slot and equipment slot, we made this UI right here where you could click on things and it would spawn a cube around the character at that point. And this was basically showing us how we could make a little UI and link that to parts of our character's body. Now that's good. We're not actually going to be using that today because before we combine all this stuff together, we're going to need to define our equip logic and define how we're going to handle equipping items. So not just attaching it to the point, but also what to attach, where to attach it, how to size it correctly. There's a lot of steps we have to do first. So we will be covering that. We're not just throwing that out the window, but I'd rather do this first so that way we could actually see our items spawning and on our character as they should be. So let's go ahead and get started. First things first, let's make a few changes to our code. I just want to say that we are, I believe this is episode 18. Regardless, we are pretty far into the series, so if you want to catch up, I'll leave a link to the first episode right here, or to the entire playlist, so that way you can catch up to where we are now and watch all the inventory episodes if nothing else. And if you want the inventory episodes, I'll leave the first episode right here if that's all you care about, and you don't need to see anything else for the rest of the series. I'll show you how we set it up to this point. Now, in our, I'm calling it the third-person tutorial character, but whatever your main character is, we're going to want to include our default equipment, which we made in the previous episode. Default equipment is basically just, you know, our armor, our chest, our legs. That's what I set up in the enum. So we're going to want to include that up top, and we're going to want to make variables for each of our armor types. So if you want to have a helmet, a chest, you know, leggings, and boots, then there's four variables you'll need. You could set this up in an array or something if you'd like to keep it a little bit more organized, but since I don't plan on having too many types of armor, probably 3 or 4 that I'll actually have during this tutorial, I'm perfectly fine with just 4 different variables. So I have current helmet and current chest, and these will just be empty if there's nothing. If I'm not wearing anything, you know, if I don't have anything equipped to those slots, then they will just be, no, they won't be there. And we'll use that when we're attaching to determine if we have to destroy the object that's already there and put it away, or if we just attach the new object. But you can make 2 variables here, or again, however many you need for however many items you're going to have. We don't have to set these in the constructor. You can, at this point, you don't really need to do anything else. We already have the logic to click on things in the inventory in the blueprint, and that's what actually determines some of our attach logic. So we are going to have to update our default equipment to look how we want, and then we will attach in the blueprint and show all that logic off. So go to defaultequipment.h, and this is our base equipment class. I had an E-armor type enum before that had a helmet, chest, and legs. I actually have this as just leg because I was doing left leg, right leg, which you could absolutely do. I'm just going to have leggings as one. I'll probably have, like, you know, gauntlets or boots as one as well. I changed this to E-equipment type. You know, it's kind of weird to call everything equipment, but at the same time, it's just, in my opinion, one of the better words for it. Like, I don't really like armor type because if I want to use rings, or if I want to have, you know, you could even have something like a pet in here. You could have something that you set up in your inventory slot. Isn't necessarily armor, but something that you'll want to use on your character. So I just called it E-equipment type, and, you know, if you make this change, you are going to have to change it everywhere where the variable is. So we will have to change it for the, where we had armor type before. I made it E-equipment type, equipment type. Then in the CPP, I've set the equipment type to be helmet by default. Just a minor change, but I think it is important instead of calling it armor type. At least this way you guys know what I'm trying to get out of this. If you just want armor and you want to make equipment your own thing, by all means, go ahead. And that's all we'll really need to do in the code for now. Most of it's going to be in Blueprint today because most of it is going to be determining what item we have to attach and, if we have to remove one beforehand. So if we go into our base character BP, just to get started, there was something we did in the previous episode where we had attached these meshes, or these skeletal meshes or static meshes, depending on what we wanted to do. And this is where we were spawning the cube. So whenever we would click the button in the inventory where the slots were, we would spawn a cube on here. Well, I still have these. I have nothing assigned to them, and I'm not going to be assigning the cube anymore since we're going to want to spawn armor. So it's good as it is. You can leave everything as they are. You can leave them none for the static mesh. You could actually delete them entirely if you want. You can technically use them as long as you want. You can use it the whole time. You could use these slots. I am not going to use the slots. I'm going to just attach to the point. This was more just to show you what we could do with the static meshes, but it's completely possible you may want to leave this. Alright. In terms of the character itself, we don't have to do anything different. We have an equip action, and I call it equip, but really it's like add to inventory. And essentially what we do is if we don't have this item, and we are overlapping the item, we can go ahead and add it to our inventory. Great, that was already, that's working, that's good. And we have the ability to open, close our inventory. So let's go into some blueprints and make some stuff here. Now, we already did have base equipment BP, and I actually made all of these as well. I made the chest, helmet, and leg BP. I haven't done anything with the legs other than set their value. Ooh, there we go. I did call them basic shoes and gave them a weight, but we're not going to be using the legs today. What we're going to be using is the helmet and the chest. So we created these both in the last episode, but I didn't have the assets for them just yet. So if I go into these and go to their viewport, I don't do anything special logic-wise for them, but I did change the mesh to meet the criteria. So before we did not have anything. We didn't have a mesh for them. But in the base equipment BP, I had the equipment skeletal mesh and the equipment static mesh. So skeletal mesh is used for if you want something that can be animated, it can move around, you can have a skeleton, so you can play animations, you can use an animation blueprint, all that good stuff. If you have, different rarities of armor, sometimes the legendary armor will be a skeletal mesh and everything else can be a static mesh. Or sometimes everything's a static mesh or everything's a skeletal mesh. So it's really up to you. You definitely don't need both. But you can have both if you want to have it as one blueprint, like I have your base equipment BP, but then you still want the option of either. Then there's no problem. You can have both in here. Just you don't need to set both. So I don't assign anything in the static mesh for the base equipment BP because this is the base. I want all the children to decide what they are, not the base. So there's nothing in here for now. But in our helmet BP and our chest BP, make sure that your equipment type is correct. So for chest, I had chest, and then the rest of the stuff is on you to decide. For helmet, it's the same stuff. Make sure you have helmet as the equipment type, and then anything else you want to decide. But other than that, you don't have to change any of the logic within the graphs. There's nothing in here. This is all default stuff when you make a child blueprint, which we did in the last episode, so you will have this. But you can go to the viewport and equip either a static mesh or a skeletal mesh. So for me, I equipped the static mesh. I could put materials on it if I want. Just to show you, it does work like that. That it can be that simple. Just to show you, yeah, whatever. It doesn't really make, well, I want to change the color so it doesn't match our character. But something like this. I'm not going to keep it like this, but just to show you. So you can mess around with them as much as you want. You can make helmet BP. Great. Now, every helmet can be a child of helmet BP. You're going to change the static mesh. So you could go down the line. Or you could just go everything off of base equipment BP and have a bunch of children. For every helmet you have in the game, you could have a different one. And just change the mesh and change the details about it. You know, these will probably be in a database, actually, and that's probably what will get filled out instead of having all these different actors. But it can be done either way. Since I don't have a ton of assets and a ton of, helmets, chests that I'm going to be using, I'm good to make them all separate. Okay, but I have the armor now. We can go back to base equipment BP now that stuff is set up. Alright, now in the previous episode we set this stuff up. This is all the overlapping stuff from the weapon blueprint, and we copied it over and we're using it in here. Everything here works with the default item, so it will work with weapons, equipment, consumables, anything that we consider a default item. So we did not have to change anything to be specific to the equipment here, and that's good. That's what we want. It makes our lives convenient, and it's pretty safe. It's a pretty safe method of doing this. We know that it works before with the weapons, so it might as well keep using that safe method. However, changing, adding equipment and removing it off of our character is a little bit different than it was with the weapon. So a few differences, just for now. It might not be different forever, depending on how we end up setting up the weapons as well. But just for now, we need these different slots that we want to confirm. So if we have a helmet, we don't want to be able to equip that to our chest. We don't want to be able to equip that to our legs. We want to equip it to our head. So we are going to have to determine what type of equipment this is before doing certain actions. So in base equipment BP, we're going to add some logic. I'm going to open up base weapon BP so that those of you that followed this part of the inventory tutorial for the weapon, you can look at this and compare. Okay, so I want to show you a few things. So first of all, this is base weapon BP, and we were doing remove weapon, and an attached weapon, we were doing remove weapon, which I should have just called the event here, by the way. Could have just called remove weapon and gotten rid of all this stuff since it's already done right here. And then we were setting the weapon and attaching it. We didn't really care what type of weapon it was at the time. We did set the weapon type so that we knew what we were using and we knew what we were holding. But it is going to come into play where we're going to need to know what type it is if we want to have different functionality. If we want to do different blend spaces, different animations, then we're going to want to do this. If we want to dual wield weapons, we're going to want to do this. And, we're going to want to know what item is in what slot and what type it is. And we're going to set that up now in the base equipment BP. So we're going to follow the same logic as we did in base weapon BP, but we're going to make it work for equipment. That's the easy way to say it. So make two events, one for equipping it and removing the item, just like we have in the base weapon BP. You can right click and do add custom event, and add one for each of these. Again, I called them equip and remove equipment. Now, I also made two functions. I called one detach equipment and one attach equipment, just because I thought that the weapon BP one was, first of all, it had a little bit of duplicate logic, and also I thought it was just a little bit uglier than it had to be. But it's going to come in handy here to make functions because we're going to separate the logic based on the type that it is, like helmet or chest, but I still want to perform the same logic. I just want to perform it on a different object. However, I do need to know if it's the correct type before doing so. So think about it this way. If I have a helmet on and I try to remove my chest piece, well, I don't have to destroy the helmet to remove the chest piece, to remove the armor on my body. It wouldn't make sense to remove my helmet to do that. That's what we were doing with the weapon. We were just taking whatever our current weapon was and just removing it. But we don't want to do that here. We need to make sure everything is independent, which is why this is a little bit different. So after you've made these events, equip equipment is going to be what gets called when we use the inventory menu and try to equip a piece of armor, a piece of equipment. So let's open that up now. So single inventory item is the button that has the data. So we set this up again in the inventory menu. And this is what it was before this episode. So we were basically checking if this button was the object that was in use. That way we didn't have any weird logic with that. And we went ahead, and if there was a current weapon already, we removed the weapon. And if there wasn't, then we created the weapon and attached it to our character. Well, I'm not going to go over all this logic, just because we've already done it. I've already gone over it in an episode. I'll link it right here in the sidecar, just in case you want to look at this specific episode. But you can copy this and paste it right here. Okay, copy, paste. Alright, so just paste it down below. This is the same block of code. We are going to add a few things, but it's a good starting point. Because we're going to be splitting up our logic now. So it was fine before, because we only had a weapon. So we only had to call remove weapon, and we only had to cast to a base weapon BP. But things are different now. If the type of item that this object reference is set to, mind you, the object reference is set in the set object reference function, which gets called when we make the button. So this has a reference to the object we're going to create and attach. Well, what we can do is cast this to the type that we want to perform logic on. So if you do cast to default weapon, just like this, you can say if the cast succeeds, that's this top line here, then we do the logic we had already set up in the past. We don't have to change anything with this. However, if the cast fails, because default weapon and default equipment are children of default item, but they are not related, you know, they don't have a parent-child relationship, and they're not equal in class. So we can't if the object is equipment, it will not cast the default weapon successfully. So the cast will fail, and then it will go into this cast. Alright? See, I did it down below. And I'm casting the object reference to the default equipment class. If that succeeds, then we use the new logic we pasted below, and again, I have to update it a little bit here. But you can see it goes into the new logic. So that's excellent. That's what we want. If you have other things under default item, like if you had default consumable, then I could cast fail and go again. We just want to make sure we have the right object type, so we're not making any assumptions about what the object is or what class type it is. Alright, so after the cast of default equipment, again, this is the same as the default weapon, but I will cover this because there are a few changes that we had to make. So, this is in use is for the button. Admittedly, it's a bit of a hack, but essentially what this was doing was allowing us to click on the button and then click on it again without trying to spawn the item again. It was essentially just saying this button was in use, so it's active, or it's inactive. And that determines the logic that we want to do. So if it is in use, this means that this is actually equipped. This item is equipped on our character. And if that's the case, we have to remove it from our character because it's a toggle. If it's equipped and we're clicking it again, we're taking it off of our character. So we do something called getOwningPlayerPawn, which will get the owner of this widget. Now the characters themselves spawn the widget when they perform an action, press a button or a key. So it's going to be the character that we are controlling, or whoever is controlling. We can cast that to our actual character type. Nice third-person tutorial character. And we're going to use this to check their current helmet and current chest to see if we have to remove it off of the character. We toggled it, so we want to remove it, if that's the case. Also, though, we're going to need to determine what type it is so we know which type to check for to remove. So drag off of default equipment. I'm going to clean that up. I did not realize that was there. There we go. So drag off of the cast to your default equipment, because this is the object reference as default equipment. So we can grab the equipment type, which is our enum, off of that. So literally drag off of it and type equipment type. Right here. Then you can drag off of the equipment type enum and type switch. And now once you've done that, it will bring up all your options, and we only want to perform the correct logic for whatever the option is. So for example, if this equipment type for this object that the user is clicking on is a helmet, we only want to check the helmet. So if we're removing the helmet, like in this case, we have to see if it's even valid. Even if it's the right type of helmet, we might not be wearing one. So toggling it off doesn't actually do anything. It would actually cause an issue if we tried to destroy or remove a piece of equipment that wasn't currently equipped. So we're going to drag off our third-person tutorial character, get current helmet, which these are the variables that we made in code just earlier. Get current helmet, current helmet and current chest, and they're blueprint, read, write, edit anywhere. We can drag off this, get those two, and I'll show you what that looks like. Sorry, not current helmet. Get current helmet. And it'll look like this. However, we have to make sure it is valid before we do anything else with this. We're going to be setting it to be invalid, to be null if the character is not wearing anything. And because of that, we need it to be valid before we do these things, or we can cause a crash. So you can right-click on this node and hit Convert to Validated Get. Alright, and you can see how I've done it here. So I'll delete this one. But this is the current helmet node. So only if the equipment type from the object reference cast is a helmet, and only if it's valid. You can see I don't do anything from is not valid. Only if it's valid do I do this logic. All we have to do now is remove the equipment. The blueprints are the ones that have the remove equipment and the attach equipment. See, or equip equipment and remove equipment events. So we need to make it the blueprint version, which is why we're casting here. So we drag off of the element, like the current helmet, and do cast to helmet BP, or whatever type it is. You can see if it's the chest from the equipment type, I get the current chest, I cast to chest BP. Then, each of these, since they're both children of the base equipment BP, have access to our events. So we want to call remove equipment. Remove equipment, I'll show you how to make these in base equipment BP because they do need a character reference. So after you've added these two as custom events, which I was talking about earlier, you can click on them, go to the details panel, go to inputs, click the plus to add a new parameter, and make it your character type. So mine is third person tutorial character object reference. And this is so, we have the owner of the widget, and we want to make sure we're calling this on the right actor. If you have multiple characters in a game, or multiple characters you can control, then you may want to make sure you're removing it from the right type, which is why I went ahead and did this here. We don't want to remove it from the wrong character. So if we have a character reference, we know that we can use that to remove and attach equipment. So do that for both equip and remove equipment. And in the single inventory item, where we just were, we set the target of remove equipment to be our cast items. And our character reference is this guy right here, which is our cast to our third person tutorial character. And then we set is in use to be false under both circumstances, or as many as you need. That way, this knows that you just toggled it. Now let's look at the other case. If is in use is false, meaning that it's not equipped. Well, we want to equip it then. This stuff is the same as it was before, but we have our object reference, we get the class, we get the actor transform, and we spawn a new actor. So in this case, it's equipment. So we spawn our chest piece, and instead of casting to base weapon BP like we did above, this is above, we're instead casting to base equipment BP. We still have to get our third-person tutorial character because we need him to call attach equipment. And then off of base equipment BP, just call attach equipment. Before we were calling attach weapon. So you can see it's the same process. And then pass in the casted third-person tutorial character to the character reference. And then the rest of this is the same as it was before. Basically, we loop through, we set all the others to not be in use, but we set this one that we clicked on to be in use. That way we know this is what we just toggled. Now there is a minor issue with this. Since we are now working with more than one element, a helmet and a chest piece, we will not be able to unequip both without a few multiple clicks. Depending on how we handle it, it could be you have to click twice on the chest piece or something like that. However, we're gonna fix this in the next episode when we actually go over the slots. So for now, I'm not too worried. Just know that when you are dealing with more than one piece of equipment or more than one weapon, it's actually not going to work correctly for that. You're going to have to click a few times to enable or disable them. If you have multiple ones that you clicked. If you're clicking just the one, even if you have more than one attached, it will work. And you will see that in a little bit. Alright, so that was a little bit of a mouthful, but basically in our inventory item, you're going to take your default equipment BP and you're going to call the equip and remove events that we made in our base equipment BP. And then in here, we're going to set up the logic to remove items or attach them. So I've made two functions I've called detach equipment and attach equipment. You can go ahead and make two functions by pressing the plus function button here. And I've also used the character reference. So again, inputs, third person tutorial character object reference. Detach equipment doesn't actually need that because we don't need to detach it from the character. We can detach it from the component it is attached to. Alright, let's go into these functions. So let's start with, well, first of all, equip equipment is going to call remove equipment, the event, first. Because when we're equipping something new, we want to remove what was already there. So you can literally just call this, just like that. You will need a character reference. Luckily, equip equipment has a character reference, so you can just pass that right in. Then we're going to call attach equipment. So let's cover that. Attach equipment. This is very similar to what we were doing in the weapon, but now we have to care about what type of equipment we have because that determines where we're actually going to attach this object. So we have attach equipment here with our character reference. The first thing we're going to do is go off of the character reference and grab our mesh. Just like this. Because the mesh is actually where we're going to be attaching the armor. Okay, so you can see I've gotten it here. We want to attach the armor to the socket points on our character, which we'll be setting up shortly. And so we need to do this, and we need to grab the equipment static mesh, which is just the static mesh of our equipment. Alright? Now we have these two things. We need to grab the equipment type, and we need to do a switch on it, just like we did in the inventory. We need to determine if we're setting this object to be a helmet or a chest, and where we're setting the character's variable, if, because it's going to have a reference to this item that we are spawning and setting. So here's our character reference. You can drag off of that. You can see this is what I'm pulling off of here. So character reference, set current helmet, and set current chest. And if it's a helmet off the switch, we're going to do the set current helmet. If it's off the chest, we're going to call set current chest. What we pass into these items, so let me show you. We do set current helmet. Then we can drag off of the current helmet and type self. Get it referenced to self. And that's what we're setting. Self is this object that we are in. We are in base equipment BP. So whatever object this is going to be set to the current helmet. Alright? That's why it's important to determine what the equipment type of this item is. If it's a helmet, we're setting it to current helmet, but otherwise we have to set it to current chest. We need to know that beforehand. Now, we're going to call attach to component. Again, same with the weapon. We're going to pass in, let's see if I can zoom out so you can see it. This is the target. We're going to pass in the equip static mesh as the target, and the mesh of the character as the parent. So the way you do this is you go attach to component, and the target you want is the one that has the name you want. So attach to component equip static mesh. That makes it the target. And then you can pass in the mesh of the character as the parent. Now, we're going to need sockets to actually attach this, and we need everything to be snapped to target. Technically, we don't need this, but the way it's set up now, it's what we will want to do. So set your location, rotation, and scale rules on both of these to snap the target. And then you can write these sockets out now if you want. We don't actually have the sockets created yet. We're going to do that just now. But you can write them out if you'd like so you don't forget. Probably call it head socket and chest socket. Make sure it is both identical in terms of casing, so capital or lowercase, and also in terms of spelling. Okay. And so now let's go ahead and set up our sockets. We need to go to our skeletal mesh, or just our mesh of our character. You can also go to the animation blueprint and see it. For me, I believe it is in art characters. I think it's assassin model. Here we go. Here's the skeletal mesh. Regardless, you want to find this mesh. If you're in the animation blueprint, you'll have this up at the top. You can just click skeleton or mesh here, and you'll be able to get to this. I'm going to close these two things because I don't feel like I need them. Alright, now you won't have the armor on when you get in here, but you will have a character that looks like this, whatever your character is in his default pose. And how we're going to handle this is we can attach assets to our character to be able to test them in real time. We actually did this during the side-scroller tutorial series for armor as well. But in our preview scene settings, over here on the right, next to details, you can go to animation, preview controller, and then use a specific animation and, put an animation in. I actually have a few. I have ones that don't move as much. Now, it's actually easier to do this while he's in T-pose, so you don't have to put an animation on, but I do like to play around with the animation to make sure that the armor looks good with where it's at. You can see there's some clipping depending on certain animations, and that's okay. This armor was given to us by Everglades. Very, very kind of them to allow us to use the armor. Thank you so much for these excellent assets. And because of this, though, it was not, of course, designed for this character. So it's not anything wrong with the armor design. It was not meant for this character. So that's on me for clipping. It's not any issue with the assets. But I'm just bringing this up because you do need to check and make sure, this is how you can avoid some clipping. You can kind of look at this. Now, you won't have the armor attached yet, and I realize that. I'm just letting you know you can use these assets if you want to determine how they should look. Or you can just leave it as the T-pose. It's fine either way. We need to make sockets for our items. Now this part doesn't really matter. It's up to you where you want it to be. You want to pick a bone in the hierarchy here and determine where it should be in relation to the item that you want to use. So if I want a helmet, I want it to be toward his head. If I want a chest plate, I want it to be more toward the center of his body. So I picked head as the bone. This is a Mixamo skeleton. So if you are using a Mixamo assets, then you may want to, follow along exactly with this, but you don't have to. You can put it wherever you like. So for the head, I went ahead and made my head socket. So you right-click on the bone that you want to make the socket, and you hit Add Socket. This will come up, and it will give it a name for you. I think it will actually call it the bone name and the socket. So I think head socket is the default socket, or the default name in this case. But you can rename it by clicking on the socket, right-click on it, and hit Rename Socket. Alright, and now we have our socket, and you don't have to do anything with it. It's just attached to that bone. So now we can use it in the blueprint logic and actually attach our helmet to it. But we have to preview it first. Well, we don't have to, but if we don't know if the asset works with the character directly, maybe either it wasn't designed for it, or, it's scaled up for whatever reason, different things like that, we're going to need to take a look at it, and we can do it right in here without having to manually change it and test it over and over again. We can actually test it right within this window. Right-click on your socket, add preview asset, and pick the type you want. I called them chest A and helmet A. So I attached it, literally click it, and then it will show up somewhere. Mine was a lot bigger. You can see from my helmet asset, if I go to the details, these are the details I set up for the socket. This is so that it would fit on the character's head the way that it does. So you might need to change these as much, the location, rotation, and scale may need to be adjusted to fit on your character. Once it looks good in here, you're actually good. That means that is where you're not changing the preview asset, you're changing the socket details. Now, the only issue with changing the socket details is if all your assets are kind of different with where they're at, then, you know, if certain assets are different sizes or different things, you don't want them to scale, you may have to set this every time when you're setting it up. There are a few downsides to it, and there are a few risks to it, but we can actually fix them all later without too much issue. So for now, try and use things that are the same, but I will cover some techniques in making it smoother and being able to change it on the spot as opposed to having one default value. You could also have multiple sockets if you have like 2 sets that are different. Say some are really big and some are really small, so you have to change the scale. You could have 2 sockets and attach the proper socket as a workaround for now. Okay, and now we just have to do that for the chest. It's the same thing, so I'll be quick, but basically find somewhere you want. I believe I picked the spine 2. Yes. No. Spine 1. I picked spine 1. Alright. So spine 1, I renamed it to be chest socket. And then I attached a preview asset. I attached my chest plate. I changed my size. And here we go. Now I have it on my character and I'm satisfied with it. I'm saying, yep, I'm happy with it sitting just like this. Cool. So now you're good to go as far as the sockets go and as far as equipping these items go. Now when you attach those items, they will automatically be where you'd like them to be, as long as you snap them to the target. So we can go back to base equipment BP, make sure that these socket names match what you had in your skeleton tree. And now these should attach properly to your character. Lastly, I do have something called the interaction box here, which is the interaction box for the equipment and for the weapon and for the item. We have it on all of them. This is basically where we pop up the little widgets like, would you like to add this to your inventory or equip it or whatever it asks you. So in attach equipment here, I set the interaction box to have no collision. So select set collision enabled to no collision, which basically means don't allow us to collide with that box anymore, because there's no reason to collide with it. If it's on our body the whole time, we don't want to be checking collision for it. Alright, and now we have to cover remove equipment event, which has the character reference again. So this is similar to what you were seeing within the single inventory item. In fact, you kind of do the same thing, so it's a little bit of double logic here, but basically, we grab the equipment type of this base equipment BP, we do a switch on it, we make sure that we get the current helmet and current chest of the character reference, set them to be validated gets, cast the correct blueprint type so that we can call the correct animation, or excuse me, the correct function, which is detach equipment, and then we set the values back to be nothing when we're done. So this stuff you've seen before. Detach equipment is the new function we made here, which we'll cover in a second. And then set current helmet and set current chest have nothing plugged into them. You see that? It's got the target plugged into it, but we have nothing plugged into it, which means we're setting it to be nothing. Null pointer if it's a pointer, or just null. Basically, we're saying we're not wearing a chest or a helmet. That's why we're removing the equipment. And to do that, you can just drag off your character reference, set current helmet, set current chest, and just don't plug anything into it. Plug the white line into it, and just leave it alone. Okay? Now, let's go over detach equipment. This one's pretty easy. In fact, it's basically the exact same as the weapon one, except we changed from the weapon static mesh to the equipment static mesh. So get your mesh, convert it to a validated gate. You don't technically have to do this. It should be valid if you're doing it at this point, but just in case it's not, I have had issues with the past with meshes not being valid, but it was a pretty obscure case, so I don't think anyone would run into it, not for a long time anyway. But regardless, then you can do set collision enabled again and just be no collision. You can also drag off of it and do detach from component, like I'm doing here, which will remove it from the components attached to. So if it's the helmet, it will remove it from the mesh, because that's what we attached it to. And then we want to destroy it immediately after. After it's been detached, we want to get rid of it. It's not like we want to leave it in the scene. If you want to drop an item, then you want to destroy it. You would detach it and let it be its own thing on the ground, right? But since we are just detaching it, adding it back to our inventory, we just want to destroy it right after. Okay, so that's base equipment BP done. Our single inventory item is done. And all the setup for these is also done. Like, we've called all the correct functions. We have set up the correct logic to do it in the inventory. So let's do a few tests here. I'm going to close actually everything other than the base character BP. Now, in the construction script, I went ahead and used I have static meshes here, as we talked about in the last episode, where we could assign things right here and show, and have them show up. So if I say helmet A, then it will actually attach to this point, because in the construction script, we were doing this with right-hand collision, but now I have attached a component SM head to the mesh and SM chest to the mesh under the same sockets. If you do it this way, you can keep it relative, because these are directly their components of the character. You could just set these and actually have them equipped all the time. I like the idea of attaching them and unattaching them like we did, but they're both very similar methods. The difference is if we do this in the construction script, you can see it in the viewport, but then it would be happening in game as well. So you may not want that, because if I play, I have it attached now, but I don't have any like helmet attached. So if you don't have the helmet attached, then you're gonna want to set up the logic to work for that. This is not at all by any means necessary. I want to show you how we could use the slots that we set up if you wanted to, and that's how you can test things with it, if nothing else. You can say, oh, I just want to equip it really quickly, go to my viewport, okay, that looks good, and then I can go back and I can get rid of this. No harm done. Then everything's back to normal, but I can also see what we want to see on the character. Now when I go up, you can see I changed the color of these. And go into my inventory, and I can equip my helmet, which you can see is blue. And it works. It's golden. I can also equip my chest plate. And it's literally golden. Now if I try to equip my helmet or unequip this, at this point things will get messed up, because it actually says, oh no, this button's no longer in use. We clicked on another button, and then it can't find out for this object if we should remove it or add it. And it continues to add more on top of each other. So you can see why that's a problem, and that's why we need these weapon slots, because we will actually check each slot instead of just setting it in, setting the buttons to be equipped for everybody. And we'll also add a little indicator saying, this item is currently attached or whatever. Like a little check mark to say, yes, you are wearing that armor. And that way you won't be able to equip it more than once, and you won't be able to equip more than one type, or at least be confused as to why you can't equip more than one type. Because right now it's not very indicative. It just shows you, yep, there's a helmet here, there's a chest plate, and I click it and things happen in game. So we got all sorts of stuff to fix with that, but that's pretty good. Now you can actually equip things. You'll be able to have these attached in your character, so you know exactly what's in your inventory, what's on your character, like as far as attached components, so armor, rings, weapons, anything that is literally attaching to your parent. But anyway, guys, I think that's about it for today. In the next episode, we are going to be covering dual wielding weapons, and actually, we're going to be doing that. We're going to upgrade the weapon system to work with more than one weapon at a time, and different weapon types, kind of like we did today, but not as in depth with that because we don't need it. We're just going to have another weapon type, and we're going to be able to dual wield weapons. And with that, we will be able to change our stance or our animations based on if we're dual wielding or not. That is a requested video, and thank thank you so much for the great idea. I think it sounds fun, so we'll definitely be covering that. Regardless, we do have a few more inventory episodes to do. We have that one, and then I want to actually use these slots. I'll do click functionality, and we will go over controller with this series, so you'll be able to do both. But that way we'll be able to assign things to specific slots using those two features. And anyway, guys, that's all I got for you today, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for me and the channel than anything else you can do. I would just really appreciate it, and just lets me know that I'm doing a good job and helping you guys learn what you want to learn. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. We'll be happy to help you with any issues you had. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you guys for continuing to believe in me and giving me great ideas for content and letting me know things you want to see. I really appreciate it, and I have a great time doing it. Lastly, guys, if you want to see some programming live streams, I live stream every Friday. You can talk to me in the chat and kind of, maybe figure out some different things about game design or game development, different things that could be useful for you making your own game. Alright, guys, and with that, I am done, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.